Hi, everyone. Come on in and get settled, and we will get started in just a moment. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm L'Oreal Lance, CTAA's Membership Director, and we are so excited to have May Mobility and a suite of transit professionals joining us for our first post-expo webinar. I hope that you all had a fabulous time networking and engaging and in learning in Oklahoma City at the end of May. Speaking of that, May Mobility had a fabulous minivan out on the floor that was autonomous supported. So I hope that you got to check that out, because today they're going to share all about the different perspectives, support, and vision that you should be considering as you hopefully consider implementing autonomous vehicles in your communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daisy Wall.
Thanks so much, L'Oreal, and thank you everybody for joining today. We're very excited. I think according to the last count, we had about 134 people who are interested in this particular webinar. And I'm very excited because really the focus of today's webinar is going to be from a few of our innovators in the DOT sector. And I've actually had the honor and privilege to work with all of them in different capacities, not necessarily on the AV side, in some areas on the AV side, others in technology and other areas. But each of them have a really unique perspective, and some underlying themes here are leadership, innovation, really looking at demand and how to serve different types of rural and urban populations. And we're just very grateful to have the three of them here. And so I wanted to quickly introduce them, and they can quickly say hi. And the way this is going to go today is that we're going to spend about 15 minutes. Each of them will be talking about their own Department of Transportation vision and some of the things that they're doing today and what they're looking towards the future. Then after that, we'll get into about 20 minutes of discussion in an informal panel format. And then after that, we're going to open up about 15 minutes to audience Q&A. So there is a Q&A chat box there. Feel free to utilize that, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during the course of the webinar. So that being said, our first presenter is Jean Ruestman, who's the administrator of the Office of Passenger Transportation for Michigan DOT. Jean, do you want to just wave hi there? Awesome. Our second presenter is Sarah Searcy, and Sarah is a senior advisor for innovation for NCDOT's Integrated Mobility Division. There's Sarah. And then lastly, we have Thomas Johnson-Kaiser, who's engagement and project manager for MnDOT's Connected and Automated Vehicles Office for Minnesota Department of Transportation. Great. Okay, well, let's get started. Jean, do you want to kick us off there?
Absolutely, I'd love to. And you already introduced me, so you can go ahead and skip already to the next slide if you'd like. So we were asked to just talk about three things. And first was our perspective, which I took to mean what is the role of a state DOT? And Michigan DOT, with automation and with a lot of other things, we've always tried to be the leaders. We try to step out in front and show people a way to set an example, and really use it as a way to inspire people, empower, share our vision, and make sure that we are constantly moving the whole transportation industry forward. And we took that same approach with automation. Obviously, I'm focused on automated transit, but we have other folks within the department that are interested in automation and how it impacts the entire transportation network. So whatever we can do to step out, be leaders, start taking that risk for people. And that is what it boils down to, is that many who are impacted by this, especially public transit agencies, just really can't take risk. They don't have the funds that they can risk. They need to maintain local support, so they can't take a risk of failing at something. And we try to step into that role for them and be those risk takers, so we can learn the lessons and pass that along so they can implement projects that have already had some proven success. We do engage them as partners. So we are funding projects at agencies. And if you want to go to the next slide, that kind of leads in to what we do to support the autonomous vehicle, emergence, is that we fund projects, and we also just provide technical support to projects. So a few here that we have funded through a federal grant, but initially through a state-sponsored mobility challenge, automated wheelchair securements in route vehicles. Right now, the equipment is quite heavy. It only works on large vehicles, but they're working on smaller. We were excited at the success through our mobility challenge, and then applied for a grant to receive more, and so we could spread them out to other transit agencies. There is the partnership on Michigan State University between the university and ADASTEC, who they convert vehicles to autonomous. And we brought those two partners together. We had been talking to them individually and brought them together, and they're doing a demonstration on campus that's been very successful. We are part of the Automated Bus Consortium. We're one of the founding partners in the Automated Bus Consortium, which is a group of, started off with other states. I think we may be the only state in it currently, state DOT, but other large transit agencies from around the state who are interested in advancing autonomy on large vehicles. Places like May Mobility have done such a great job of showing us how smaller vehicles can be used effectively, but we felt there is a need to learn more about larger vehicles. And so we actually recently did we bid out for a 40-foot autonomous vehicle, learned a lot from it, but decided the industry simply wasn't ready yet. And so now we're regrouping, reimagining what that can look like, and we'll be going out to bid again at the end of the year, using the lessons we learned from that first go round. And another exciting project that's really brought in many parts of our department is the CAVNU project. It's the CAV corridor within the state. And so far, there's not funding that's gone to it. It is technical support. It is the support of using state highway infrastructure and bringing all of us together to talk about how can it support transit? How can it support all different factors in the transportation network? And I keep using the word network because that's so important. So I'm almost out of time. So go to the last slide and I'll talk about our vision. If you want to go one more slide, there you go. And that wasn't a very exciting slide, but because our vision hasn't really changed. Our vision has always been for people to be able to get where they need to go, is to improve mobility for all people. And if that can be done more efficiently with autonomous vehicles in the mix, that's what we want to do. And so we keep that vision of our end goal of getting people places that they need to be but that shifts with what technology, that we support all types of technology and a good mix of all types of vehicles, whether they be autonomous or not, and they're connected or not. So that is what kind of drives us at MDOT and moves us forward in this vision. And I know I'm like out of time and maybe over a little bit. So I will go ahead and pass it on to Sarah to talk about her state.
Oh, thank you very much, Jane. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with you North Carolina Department of Transportation's vision for mobility in North Carolina, and specifically how shared autonomous vehicles play an important role in our vision. Next slide, please. When we think about the future of transportation in North Carolina, we are imagining a system where shared mobility options are convenient, reliable, affordable, clean, and safe. This system makes it easy for anyone to get where they need to go without the need for a car. The system has layers of shared mobility options that are centralized at mobility hubs and connected by complete streets. Traveling across modes and to destinations near and far is as easy and convenient as driving. Through a single digital platform, anyone can seamlessly discover, plan, book, and pay for complete journeys across travel options and borders. The future of transportation is ecosystems of mobility that produce equitable outcomes. This means a transportation system with options that serve every individual fairly, so every person from every demographic can reach their full economic and social potential and enjoy a high quality of life. Next slide, please. So we are guided by the idea that robust shared mobility options benefit all people. To create multimodal transportation systems that work for everyone, we need high-quality shared mobility options throughout our state that meet the needs of all populations. Our transportation disadvantaged populations, including older adults, people with disabilities, and people in low-income households and with limited vehicle availability, experience barriers to participation in daily life and limited access to employment, education, health care, and healthy food. A truly multimodal transportation system with robust shared mobility options and facilities that accommodate all users can help eliminate barriers by providing alternatives to driving, whether walking, biking, or rolling. Next slide, please. This is where shared autonomous vehicles come in. We see them as an emerging mobility option. We're actively researching, piloting, and evaluating for public transportation. That's really important. The Integrated Mobility Division at NCDOT, we cover both public transportation and bicycle and pedestrian transportation. We merged those divisions back in 2019, and at that merger, we launched a new program called the CASI program, the Connected Autonomous Shuttle Supporting Innovation, so that we can explore shared autonomous vehicles. What we want to do is demonstrate to the public how these vehicles can operate in safe, real-world settings. We want the public to be able to experience them firsthand. NCDOT is partnering with communities across the state to do the testing, to do the evaluation, and pilots that provide free shared rides to the public. And we always have a rider survey because we want to have feedback from folks who are experiencing the technology to understand what's working for them and what may need to be improved as the technology improves. Those pilots are focusing, again, on how the technology is being used for transit by riders with different needs and different environments, and mostly focused on first mile, last mile applications, because we see that as the application that the technology in its current state is best suited for. We began the CASI program with a partnership with Easy Mile. We completed 3 projects with Easy Mile's Easy 10 vehicle from 2020 to 2021. This includes on the Centennial campus of North Carolina State University and at the Wright Brothers National Memorial in partnership with the National Park Service. That project was the first autonomous shuttle deployment at a recreational public land site. We recently partnered with Beep to lease a similar novel design, low-speed automated vehicle with operations support for multiple projects. We just completed our first project. It was a 13-week pilot in the town of Cary's Fred G. Bond Metro Park. It ended on June 2nd, and the shuttle is actually out in Charlotte, North Carolina now, where it will open in July for a 6-month pilot on UNC Charlotte's campus. And so Beep is working in partnership with a company called Navia to provide the automated shuttle. The shuttle that they provide is the autonomy, and that's what we're going to be using for our projects through the end of the year. While we continue to demonstrate those novel design, low-speed automated vehicles, we're also trying to expand the scope of the CASI program to include autonomy-enabled conventional vehicles, like the vehicles that May Mobility is offering. So these are vehicles that we expect can operate at higher speeds, can expand the use cases that we're exploring, and really, ideally, meet more transit needs. That would be the goal. And so in partnership with May Mobility, with CTAA, via NCDOT State University, and several transit agencies in our state, we submitted a grant application to the US DOT Advanced Transportation Technology and Innovation, or ATTAIN program. The project would have provided autonomy-enabled and accessible on-demand transit that connects transportation disadvantaged populations to essential services and jobs in 3 communities in our state. Our project was not awarded, but we plan to resubmit our application. We feel it's very strong. We're very supportive and enthusiastic about the concept, and we have broad support from transit agencies in our state to pilot, to test autonomy-enabled conventional vehicles in transit services with a specific focus on microtransit, on-demand transit, which is becoming more and more popular within our state. And then finally, NCDOT is supporting NCA&T State University to develop their own shared autonomous vehicles, including an innovative rural test track and also an autonomous shuttle pilot between the university campus and downtown Greensboro. These are Polaris GEM vehicles that have been outfitted with autonomous driving systems, or automated driving systems, and they will be 3 vehicles total that will operate in a 1-month pilot to connect students from the university to downtown. And so I again appreciate this opportunity. I want to hand the presentation over to Thomas now so he can share all the exciting work that his state is doing.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here to share what we have going on in Minnesota with connected automated vehicles. So we refer to our broad umbrella of the work we're doing with connected automated vehicles as Destination CAV in Minnesota. A lot of this stemmed from an executive order from our governor back in 2018 that established a governor's advisory council on connected automated vehicles to help plan and prepare the state for emerging transportation technologies. So this council is made up of 15 folks throughout the cab industry in the state of Minnesota that help guide and set the vision for the state regarding connected automated vehicles. Under that advisory council, we also have an innovation alliance, which is 5 committees made up of industry experts that are focused on the topics of safety, infrastructure, workforce, education and outreach, and connectivity and data. And we also have, with our CAV partners, an interagency CAV team, which is made up of representatives from different state agencies across Minnesota to look at how connected automated vehicles may impact Minnesota as a whole. So in MnDOT, we have a connected automated vehicle office, which I'm a part of, which helps convene and organize all these different partners. And under that, we also have a strategic plan and some guiding principles that set the future vision and plans for our work with connected automated vehicles. In addition to convening all these different CAV partners under our Destination CAV umbrella, we also have our CAV program and different research and demonstration projects that we have throughout Minnesota that are looking to implement and test different CAV technologies in different environments throughout the state. Next slide, please. So we also look at what is unique about Minnesota. Why do we want to be testing and looking at connected automated vehicles? One thing is winter weather. So in Minnesota, we get very harsh winters in kind of all 4 seasons. So I wanted to make sure that these technologies are being tested in all weather conditions. So we think that Minnesota is a great place to do that testing and advance the technology that way. We've been working on CAV for a while. So with our connected automated vehicle office, we have dedicated staff that have the expertise to be able to support this testing of technology. We also are very fortunate in Minnesota where we have dedicated funding specifically for CAV. So a lot of our projects are funded through a program called the CAV Challenge, which is dedicated funding just to look at how we advance transportation technology. In Minnesota, we're also very open to innovation and trying new ideas. And we have that testing experience, many years of doing intelligent transportation systems testing, and also looking at CAV for the last 5 to 10 years here. We also made lots of great investments in different technologies, so we're set up well to test CAV vehicles in Minnesota. And finally, like I mentioned, we do have great leadership support with the Governor's Advisory Council and overall support at MnDOT for advancing connected automated vehicles. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, these are some of the areas that we're planning to focus on moving forward. So there's still a lot of work to be done with CAV. So some areas we're looking at is developing different standards around performance or location-based standards for things like work zones or school zones. Safety continues and always will be top priority. So looking at how this technology can help with transportation safety. Look at areas like privacy and security or liability and insurance policies, and also what our infrastructure might need to, how our infrastructure may need to be updated to support connected automated vehicles. So we have a lot of exciting projects going on in Minnesota and looking forward to continuing to work in the area. And with that, I think I'll pass it back over to Daisy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Thomas. So I'm going to go back here really quickly. So folks, just so we're at the beginning, just in case people want to reach out. So a couple of themes we're hearing here, right? I think Jean said network, right? A mobility network. Sarah said ecosystem, and I think Thomas, you had mentioned kind of holistic and looking at leadership and comprehensive approach. So I think the common thread is that, for public transit, there seems to be a need and really justifully so, I think, that it needs to kind of connect into the existing infrastructure. Curious to know from a community perspective, would love to hear maybe what the community has said about these types of programs, what's been the feedback, and then maybe if you could talk a little bit about some use cases, within your existing community and some of the more specific programs that you've launched. I think that would be super helpful. So maybe Sarah, I'll start off with you if that's okay. What's the community said about the different types of deployments you've had?
Sure. So we, as I mentioned in my remarks, we do implement a rider survey. So folks who have experienced the shuttle in a CASI project can give their feedback on their experience. And our two most recent projects were both 13 weeks. One was at the Wright Brothers National Memorial in partnership with Easy Mile. And the second was at 13 weeks as well in the Bond Park in Cary, North Carolina. From both of our rider surveys, we saw that over 90% of respondents had a good experience using the shuttle. And they were using the shuttle mostly for a fun experience. Some folks were using the shuttle primarily to reach a destination, but it was more about engaging with the new technology, learning more about it. They had never ridden an autonomous transit vehicle before, and they just wanted to see it for themselves. For the Bond Park project in particular, one of our stops was at the Cary Senior Center, and the majority of folks who responded to our survey were age 50 and older. And we had remarks in our survey responses about, how wonderful it was to have the shuttle there to be able to explore locations within the park that, a respondent hadn't seen before, hadn't experienced before because they didn't feel comfortable driving themselves. So folks who may have in the past their primary destination was the senior center because they had activities or engagements there that they were participating in, and then really experiencing this place in a new way because they had an additional mobility option offered to them that was free and easy and accessible. And in my mind, the big takeaway was any transit would be good in that instance. And it was an added benefit to be able to test the autonomous shuttle and to get some additional feedback and see how well it could perform in that environment and under the conditions that were offered by Bond Park.
No, that's great. And Thomas, I'd love to hear from you as well. I know you've been through a couple of variations of that, and your most recent one with May is the Grand Rapids, Minnesota project, where we launched there to a community of seniors and people with disabilities. Do you mind sharing a little bit about the community reception there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a huge goal of our CAVX office at MnDOT is really to educate and inform the community and the public on connected automated vehicles. So we did a statewide survey getting people's feelings on CAV a few years ago. And one thing we saw from there is that about 68% of people had at least somewhat positive feelings about CAV. So people still overall pretty positive. There definitely are, some people that had some questions and concerns, which is great and what we're willing to learn about. And as Daisy was mentioning, we've had 3 different autonomous vehicle deployments in Minnesota. The first 2 were similar to some of the projects that Sarah mentioned of doing low speed shuttles in specific communities. One was in Rochester, Minnesota, that ended in August of 2022. And then another one just got wrapped up in White Bear Lake, which is just a suburb outside the Twin Cities here. That was another low speed shuttle. And similar to Sarah, we have pre and post ride surveys for all of our deployments. And the third one, as Daisy mentioned, is currently underway in rural Minnesota and northern Minnesota in Grand Rapids. And what we've seen across all 3 of those demonstration projects is that really mostly positive feedback, and that feeling of excitement and comfortability of automated vehicles really increases after people experience the technology themselves. So looking at their feelings pre-ride versus post-ride, that feeling of excitement and acceptance really increases consistently what we've seen. And so we still, there's definitely are still some skeptics out there and people that have questions and concerns, and we want to know that information. That's one of our goals, is really working with the public to help us make decisions on how this technology can best be used for moving forward to serve all Minnesotans.
No, thanks so much, Thomas. And I know we're very excited about that particular program, primarily because they're seniors and people with disabilities. And I think over 25% of the riders are actually people who use wheelchairs, which is a great application and use case. And I know Sarah had mentioned earlier too that even with some of her deployments, that seniors like 50 and older were early adopters of the program. Jean would love to talk a little bit about, something you had mentioned earlier. And I think Sarah alluded to it as well, is this concept of mixing, modes of transportation and vehicles, right, with fixed route and sprinkling in micro transit and, maybe extending to paratransit. How do you envision, that working out, especially with your work with the Automated Bus Consortium?
Yeah, we really think that the solution is always going to be a mix of vehicle types, of service types. There's no one size fits all for meeting people's needs. And I think we've learned that from the beginning with transit. We've tried to meet people's needs with all routes, and that simply doesn't work. And so the same with autonomous vehicles, and for multiple reasons. So right now we're still in that testing phase, right? So going all autonomous doesn't really make sense. We're not ready for it. Cars with live drivers don't know how to respond necessarily to autonomous vehicles, and that gives us some more pain points out there. And so our approach is really that we'll slowly learn how to best use the autonomous vehicles and the different sizes, whether it's a shuttle or for paratransit service, or if it's on BRT lines or used on a campus. So you've got more of a closed infrastructure. And that's really what we're doing. And that's the Automated Bus Consortium, why we've all chosen somewhat different kinds of test scenarios to use the large automated vehicles. And they run all of those gamuts that I mentioned. And I know there was a question about extreme rural and testing in rural. And one of the test sites in Michigan will be a rural location. And we're really going to take a phased approach to it. It's a large regional route that is being developed right now to meet needs of people who live in areas where there are no hospitals. There are no institutions of higher learning. There's very limited access to lots of goods and services. And so it's quite a long route that we'll be running with it, but we're going to prove the route out first with just a traditional bus, and then move to an electric or some kind of carbon neutral vehicle, and then roll it over to an autonomous vehicle. And we think for some of those extreme cases, that's probably the better way to go. That's our hypothesis. We'll see how that tests out as we do the demonstration. But I really do think it's going to have to be a mix of all types of vehicle to meet all types of needs and all types of operating domains.
No, great, thanks. Sarah, you're going to add?
I can add to that just based
Yeah.
on our experience with the low speed automated vehicles. These vehicles are they're manufactured abroad. They're imported into the United States for research and demonstration purposes only. We call them novel design because they don't meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. And in the case of Bond Park, there was no alternative transit option in the park. The vehicle can't operate in heavy rain and high winds. If the vehicle is not available, it's not available within that particular use case. And so there was no other option. And so it's really important to think about, again, this technology is being piloted, it's still being tested, it's still being evaluated. The projects are so important for that purpose, but you should not depend on it as the only transit option in your community or to replace an existing reliable transit option that's proven and tested and assured.
And I think that goes to another question that was placed out there. Someone was asking if we've used safety drivers. And yes, right now we're still using safety drivers, and it's for those reasons. Right now we have situations that autonomous vehicles simply aren't equipped to handle. And so you need a safety driver on there. I think you also need that person to give the personal touch to. You still have customers that you're serving, and they still, even if they don't have physical needs for getting on the bus, often they want to make sure they're on the right bus, or they want to feel safe that someone is there with them. So I don't see us getting away from safety drivers, or at least, I don't know what you want to call them, companions, or,
ambassadors.
right, something
Right.
On those vehicles. So I think there's multiple reasons for that.
No, great point. And Sarah, you really, really good point is that you have to kind of look at what the use case is, right, Sarah, at the very beginning to figure out what type of autonomy, or what type of use case fits, just like you would in transit, right? Like this area, this density, this number of passengers, this circulator route may be better for a larger fixed route bus, whereas here's an area, micro transit on demand might be a little better, or if a smaller footprint, to your point, Sarah, that may not be a transportation you have to rely on, but a low speed circulator might work. So kind of mix and matching based on each of those needs is something I think would be great for whoever wants to start, right, an autonomous vehicle program to really seriously consider prior to engaging. Another question I think that's kind of interesting is how have you measured
Hold on, I think Thomas came off mute to add to that.
Thomas, sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. I just had a couple things to add to that. First of all, I think to the safety operator point, Minnesota also has safety operators, and something kind of getting back to the public feedback, what we've seen is that's the most consistent piece of feedback we get is people really appreciate having the safety operators on board. So that is really interesting to see that, like we mentioned, even if it's not necessary to assist in mobility sense, but just having that safety operator there, especially as the technology is new, to provide people with that experience that they're looking for. And also getting to the point of specific use cases, one project we're just starting at Minnesota is called Community Driven CAV, where we're looking at how do we work with a community before implementing a technology to understand what their needs are, and to your point, Daisy, of making sure that the technology is the right fit for helping solve those transportation needs and working to complement the existing transit or other transportation options that are out there currently. So really looking at how do we make sure that the community is getting their input, and that any technology that's implemented really does meet the needs of the community.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Thomas. Really appreciate that. And it's interesting. Safety operator. We operate with safety operators right now, mostly because we get mostly state and federal funds, and there's a stipulation you have to have a safety operator. In some states there is too, but it does as a technology company really allows us to really figure out how can you mimic, a safety operator. And we know this is a work in progress and iterative to ensure that there's a positive customer experience with an autonomous vehicle ride as well. And, it's super interesting, even in Minnesota, some of the qualitative feedback that we've gotten, people feel very excited, when they ride the vehicle, but also they comment, it's like, oh, we love our safety operator as well. And so, how do you actually make sure the two are well, intertwined, to make sure that customer experience is a positive one? I guess a question that I would love to present to all of you is, how have you measured success when you look at these types of programs? And I know we've heard varying different agencies ask for different things, right? But very curious from your perspective, what does success look like? So I'll work backwards a little bit. Thomas, how are you measuring success?
Yeah, so we don't have specific benchmarks or metrics in terms of riders or things like that we're looking for with these projects, as we really see them as research and demonstration projects at this point. So how we're measuring success is that we're learning and advancing the technology and kind of not repeating any challenges that come up, that it really is a success if we're making sure that we're documenting our findings, pushing forward from one demonstration project to the next in terms of advancements, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the technology. We want to be pushing the technology providers to make sure that these autonomous vehicles are accessible for all Minnesotans, and especially those who have been underserved in the past. So we really see these as research projects currently, and that's a big challenge we're seeing, is kind of how to move from that research to full-scale implementation. I don't think we're quite there yet, but making a lot of good progress, kind of step by step, with these various demonstration projects and learning from each other.
Yeah, Jean?
I totally agree with Thomas. What we're doing right now is trying to learn and trying to make sure we can make improvements in advance. So saying we want, a certain number of passengers or a certain, number of miles. We do, for the Automated Bus Consortium, we have a goal that we'd like it operating in automated mode, a certain percentage of the route. So that's one that we do use. And when we're looking at proposals, like I said, we'll be bidding out again, and I'm sure we'll set a goal for how much of the route, because we'll map out the route so people know where they're going to take these, they can operate in automated mode. But beyond that, it's what have we learned, and have we been able to overcome that, or have we identified barriers at the state or federal policy level? And those are successes when we identify those and can answer some questions about the future of automated vehicles.
Yeah. Sarah, would you like to add to that?
Echo Jean and Thomas's remarks, and the vehicles that we've been piloting have been for research and demonstration purposes. We have not taken one of these experimental vehicles and mainstreamed it into a public transit service. And the technology is not at a state to do that, to have the same level of reliability as traditional transit. We do not have absolutely defined performance measures, but we do collect a lot of data with each of the pilot projects. And that's data that's collected by the company that is operating the shuttle, and then data that we're collecting either through our own surveys or through engagement events. And so the data that we're currently collecting at NCDOT is going to include perception of comfort, convenience, and reliability, and perception of safety, acceptance based on the willingness to ride the shuttle again and to see autonomous shuttles in different places in the community. We have engagement as the number of outreach events and attendance over the pilot period. I'm very proud for the project that we recently completed in Cary, North Carolina, that we had 13 engagement events that I know of over the 13-week period, averaging one per week. And that includes a ADA engagement event where we worked with Go Cary Transit in the town of Cary to invite customers with disabilities to have their own private experience with the shuttle and to talk with us, complete an exit survey, and just tell us, does this work for you? And are there any areas in this shuttle that don't work for you? Be candid, and we can see immediately if we can implement any of those changes before the next pilot project, and we can give that information back to the company and say, yes, we understand this is an experimental vehicle. Yes, we understand that we are showcasing it for research and demonstration purposes, but as you continue to advance the technology to design new vehicles, you need to be considering everyone. And it's not acceptable to, for instance, not have an automated wheelchair ramp on each of these vehicles where that wheelchair users are going to find it to be more convenient and safer for them. It's not acceptable to not have in-vehicle messaging for folks who are blind, and to have some additional training for that safety attendant to help those passengers find their seats and to feel more comfortable in their ride. And I again echo the remarks from the group actually about the safety attendant. Folks loved our safety attendant at Bond Park. Jay Sean is amazing. I joked that he had a fan club and he had repeat riders just to come and spend time with him because he was phenomenal. He was phenomenal at making folks feel comfortable in this weird toaster on wheels looking vehicle. He was phenomenal at explaining the technology and when there were little bumps in the road, if the GPS disconnected and the shuttle suddenly stopped, or maybe there was some vegetation that was coming out into the route that was being detected as an obstacle. And that these shuttles, they don't stop gradually, they stop hard, and that's to protect the occupants, but it may be a surprise to the passenger, and it's nice to have somebody there to help explain, interpret that experience, and to give some comfort and to let folks know that's normal within where the technology is right now. So all that to say, lots of data collection. It's really important to get feedback from people directly about their experience. It's really important to do the before and after. How did you feel before you got on the shuttle? Did you really feel safe? Now, how do you feel after you had the experience? Did it match your expectations? What are your perceptions now? And it's also important to negotiate with that company that's providing the shuttle and the service to give that operational data to you, and to give it to you how you want it. Like, not aggregated to 13 weeks. Let's have the daily data. Let me know about the disengagements. That means, when did that vehicle leave autonomous mode and the attendant have to take over and manually drive? Why did they have to do that? How many times did that happen? Where did it happen on the route? That's important information for you to know when you go to plan your next project, when you think about mainstreaming this into a long-term service. And how fast can this vehicle practically go? What routes is it really well suited for now? Those are the questions you need to be asking yourself, because again, you have this toolbox of technology, you have these toolbox of different vehicles you can use to help serve the public transportation need, and you're going to work with that company, you're going to work with the folks who use those vehicles to help best fit those tools to the use case, to the community, to that environment.
Yeah, no, Sarah, all great points. And I want to kind of add to that a little bit as well, is that I think Jean had mentioned too, I think absolutely asking those questions of how long will it be in autonomy? What routes will it be in autonomy? And even seeing, kind of what the progression is as a measurement, right? It might start in autonomy at 75%, but it might go up to, 90+%. We actually, interestingly, Arlington, Texas, when we started back, in 2019, in the middle of COVID, we were at 75%, I believe, in autonomy mode. Now we're up to like 95 and above % in autonomy mode, right, with the safety operator, because it's progressed. And so things like that. The other thing to think about too is, and I'll get to this last question now, I'd love to open it up to everyone here in terms of funding, streams as well. A lot of times these projects and programs are funded by DOTs and federal government funding. And so there's a lot of interest in data, right? And so how to collect that data, both from a ridership perspective, right? The dashboards and being able to access to that, as well as from a technical perspective, right? In terms of autonomy is very important, having access to that. So last question before I move on to, and I'm going to make it a little bit twofold, and then we'll open it up to the floor here, is how have you been able to fund the programs? Kind of question one. And question two is that what would be recommendations for other DOTs who like to get started in an AV program? So two-part question here, funding, and then what would be recommendations for other DOTs? So Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Yes, for our funding, we use state funding, but we have a cost share with our partner communities, which has historically been 50%, and that's to cover the lease and the operating expenses. For the National Park Service partnership to pilot the shuttle at the Wright Brothers National Memorial, National Park Service was funded a grant through USDOT's Technology and Innovation Deployment Program, and that was to cover our deployment and also a complementary deployment at Yellowstone. So currently, as I mentioned in my remarks, we're exploring discretionary grant opportunities, but it's always helpful to have kind of recurring dedicated funding so that you can keep the service going, especially if you're establishing a new service in the community that folks become dependent on to meet their transportation needs.
Thomas, do you mind chiming in?
Yeah, so for funding, we, similar to Sarah, traditionally have used state funding for our CAV projects. Like, for example, the Go Marty project that Daisy mentioned, we are doing more with partnering with local communities like the city of Grand Rapids and local agencies as well for future projects. So we're looking at, we know we can't fund every project. There's a lot of interest from different communities within Minnesota. So how can we partner and support with local agencies and communities to fund different demonstration or implementation projects for automated vehicles? In terms of recommendations for other agencies, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is that DOTs have a great role in playing the role of a convener. So there's all these different stakeholders and affected parties within the automated vehicle ecosystem. There's technology providers. There's a question about workforce in there, insurance, public safety, different local agencies, legislators, cybersecurity. The list is endless on who people are interested and impacted by automated vehicles. So the DOT can play a great role of being a convener, all those different groups, and kind of make sure that all the affected people are part of the conversation and part of implementing this technology in a way that really can serve all Minnesotans. So I think that's a great thing to do. So be able to make connections and organize with the different affected parties within your state or your region is a great starting point.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. And Jean?
Same here, it's been a variety of funding sources, and sometimes it's not funding. Sometimes it's just bringing the right partners together. So we've been lucky enough to have some general fund money that's been provided to us to do challenges that included automated vehicles. We have a dedicated line item in our public transit budget for service initiatives, which lets us do innovative projects. So I've been able to use some of that. And some of the projects really have been like with the ADASTEC and Michigan State University. They didn't need funding, they just needed help getting together, finding each other. So that's part of what we do that doesn't cost us anything, and it has a huge benefit to it. And we're constantly though trying to get federal funds to pay, especially for when we go to buy large automated buses. They're going to be expensive. And so, applying for federal funds, and that's helpful being part of that automated bus consortium, that we all have that common goal and we keep FTA informed of what we're doing. We're also accepting new members. So if anybody else would like to join the automated bus consortium, we are accepting new members to that. And, I do think it's like everything, it's going to take all those different sources. I don't think we should ever rely on one source, but.
Yeah, we've encountered the same thing where in some locations, for example, in Sun City, Arizona, we were lucky enough to have AARP actually be one of our funding partners, primarily because they were interested in, how autonomous vehicles are adopted for seniors and people with disabilities. Whereas in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we had a collection of different funding, sources, both private and public sector, because everyone had kind of a little bit of a different interest. We actually had one funder who owned, kind of housing complexes and had said that they wanted transportation because they found that tenants were renewing their lease, further because it was transportation. And so those types of kind of collaborations, I think, and partnerships is really key to, to making sure that there's sustainability there. Well, I will stop there on our side. And I think there's a couple of questions from the audience here. Just wanted to encourage everyone to use the Q&A or the chat to ask some questions here. So let's start at the top. How does your agency navigate the concerns about unions about autonomous vehicles impacting their members' jobs? I'll maybe ask the DOTs to answer first, and then I can give definitely some experiences on the May end too, if that helps. Does anyone want to take this one? It doesn't have to be all of you.
I can go first on this one. So a couple things, like I mentioned, we have a governance advisory council, and one of the representatives on the governance advisory council was a union representative. So making sure they're part of the conversation from the very beginning is a great way to navigate any of those potential concerns. And we also have a workforce and labor innovation alliance committee that's looking at these issues and potential challenges of how jobs may be impacted with autonomous vehicles. But I think, as we all mentioned at this point, we do have safety operators in our vehicles, and current Minnesota law requires a safety operator for vehicles. So it might not be a little while till there are significant impacts, but planning for the future and making sure that unions and other concerned parties are part of that conversation from the initial beginning.
And I would just add that I think we heard that a lot early on, that unions were up in arms about it, because what people envisioned was suddenly one day, like a light switch, we'd go from, buses that had drivers to buses that didn't have any drivers at all. And as they've learned that that's simply not the case. And we may never have buses without some type of safety driver or attendant. I think that concern has gone down. So that education piece is so important.
Oh. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything further than the well-worded remarks from Jean and Thomas. It's a very similar perspective.
Yeah, I was also going to say there's a couple of, more recent, as we've been engaging in more grants and whatnot, we've also found that, some agencies actually like the idea of bringing in autonomy, because they said, there's a drive to attract more people into transit, especially the younger generation with the workforce shortage, and that, bringing in autonomy as a way to kind of train, on a new development in technology could be a way to attract more people into transit as well. And then the other interesting thing, we've been talking to more agencies who actually want to operate, the autonomous vehicles, and then also find pathways for, let's say, if someone who's a transit driver or operator wants to retire, there's an opportunity for them to be either become an attendant or be a teleoperator and not have to work maybe evening shifts or whatnot that are a little bit more difficult, weekend shifts that are a little bit more taxing and more difficult. So we're seeing some, like Jean, you said, I think we heard that earlier on, but we're seeing some variations of this as well from a workforce development standpoint. Okay, the second question, how can we provide the high level of assistance required by ADA in an autonomous vehicle?
I think that goes back to that attendant, that we're not abandoning the customers. Things may shift as artificial intelligence becomes more into play, where you have more monitoring done that can be done remotely for the passenger, checking in on them, ensuring that in all different ways that things are okay on that vehicle. I think there's lots of ways to do that. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that attentiveness is going to change just because of automated vehicles.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on ADA and accessibility?
The only thing I'll add is we see it as a major role for the DOT is making sure that autonomous vehicles are accessible for everyone and are able to meet ADA requirements. And that's why we want to work with technology providers to make sure that they have that same consideration.
And I'm just going to add too that it's not like a vehicle is just autonomous and nothing else, right? There are still so many new technologies out there to assist people with all different types of disabilities to more easily access transit, to feel more secure when they're on it. So we should never think of just one thing at a time. An autonomous bus still has lots of space for other types of technology to be added on to make that experience better and more fulfilling.
Yeah, we've heard that too, Jean. We've heard the use of buses for Wi-Fi, hotspots, for example, and other kind of byproducts of kind of using autonomous vehicles generally, and potentially using the vehicle during the day for passenger transportation, and then potentially in the evening to do other things, either deliver meals or, in resorts, deliver linens, and, airports, deliver luggage. Are there other kind of ways to utilize the vehicle fully, right? That's kind of an interesting concept there. Another question here. Let's see, with safety operators, are hours of service regulated or a factor?
I don't believe that's a factor for public transit drivers. It's only when you get into the private industry. And I do think that's an area that hasn't been figured out yet. I think that's one of those policy areas at the federal level that they'll need to gather more information on. And that's kind of why we're doing this.
Okay. Thoughts from Thomas or Sarah at all on this one? Yeah, I know I can say from a May perspective, I don't say regulated per se, but as you enter into an engagement, because at May, we actually contract directly with departments of transportation, transit agencies, and cities. And so the hours of service is part of the contract. Like we agree upon what those hours of service is, and it very much, it can mimic, public transit closely, or it can be, kind of complementing pockets of times where public transit may or may not be operating, kind of depending on the contract.
And I think they might be talking about the limit on hours of service for CDL drivers, with commercial vehicles. That's my assumption.
Yeah,
that
not
they're
quite
asking
sure.
about that,
Maybe
that
we're
since
looking at
they're
it two
not
different
driving,
angles.
Can they
Yes.
be behind the driver wheel as a safety driver for more hours than they can as a regular driver?
Right.
And that's why I think there's a lot more that has to be learned about that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Maybe tangentially, but not 100% related. Thinking about establishing your hours of service, you need to keep in mind where the technology is at in its development. Because I know for the shuttles that we use, they do not operate at night. They operate during daylight hours. And the vehicles we've been using are fully electric. And I think actually there's a question in the webinar chat about unexpected experiences. And so we had one related to the vehicle itself and it being fully electric in Bond Park. We had some unseasonably hot days in early spring, and the vehicle that Navia provides, Autonom, has a really nice AC system on it, but it will drain the battery very quickly. And so we needed to implement a midday charging scheme to accommodate the need to have that AC on to keep the passengers comfortable. And where we've moved our shuttle in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have not only the summer heat to contend with, we also have a roadway on our route with a high slope, which will also, really put the electric vehicle through its paces. And so just keeping those operational considerations in mind and how they might impact the ability for that safety attendant on board to get their full 40 hours of work, and your ability to provide that full set of hours of services to your customers.
We can, if you don't mind, Daisy, if we can stay on that question of unexpected.
Yeah, let's stay on this the last question, because I think we're 2 minutes left. So I think this is a really good one.
I one thing I found really interesting with the ADASTAC demonstration is that they found that because the automated vehicle was sensing the speed of cars that were coming through as cross traffic, and if they sensed that the car was going faster than expected for someone who was actually going to stop at a red light, the bus would stop at a green light. and no one expected that. So they got rear-ended. And so they ended up putting a follow car with the vehicle, and the follow car would be the one warning people, hey, that bus might stop unexpectedly. And so it's a learning experience to have that follow car and to understand that you have to train people in other vehicles. You have to train people what autonomous vehicles will do, because they're thinking and seeing things that you don't think and see as a normal driver.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting on the, especially on the bus side, right? Like a large bus, for them, they're probably expecting, to
And
react
to barrel through
quickly.
that light, right?
Exactly, exactly. Thomas, do you want to add to this one in terms of unexpected experiences as we wrap up right almost at the top of the
Yeah,
hour?
I'm sure we could have a whole nother hour webinar just on.
Yeah, this on just this topic alone, right?
But I think one thing in terms of kind of building off of Gene, I think we saw the biggest concerns with some of our projects with the other vehicles on the road interacting with the autonomous vehicles. We have a research project right now kind of looking at how autonomous vehicles impact other roadway users, where that's where we saw some of our biggest potential safety concerns was not with the vehicle itself, was with the other vehicles traveling around the vehicle, because it doesn't operate as a typical vehicle might or people might expect. So that was an unexpected experience for sure.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, we're right at the top of the hour here, and so wanted to thank you all for attending, everyone here who stayed on, and then also thank you so much, Sarah, Jean, and Thomas, for sharing your guidance and insight to all the CTA members on this particular webinar. I'm going to hand it back over to L'Oreal.
You're muted.
Daisy, I don't know. We may have to come back around for
We'll do a part 2. How's that?
part 2. Thank you everyone for joining us for our member webinar as we close out the month of June. Daisy has assured me that all of the materials will be available to you just shortly. And thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you for our next part of our webinar series. Have a great
Thanks,
afternoon.
everyone.